5, 3, 2, 1.
Hi everyone, welcome to this session. We're just going to wait till everyone gets in the room. So thank you for your patience. Hope you've enjoyed the video you've been watching. Hope you've been enjoying the rest of the sessions this week. Today we have Mark Abrahams, and I'll come on and do an introduction to Mark in a moment. Just still getting some people coming into the session, so there's no rush. Just get yourselves comfortable. Hopefully you've all got a cup of tea or a coffee or whatever and refreshment. So this is the third day of our digital technology conference today. Really happy to have those people back who have been with us for the last couple of days, and to you, those new people, you're very, very welcome. To get the best out of this conference, you have to download the Hoover app. That's the way you enter competitions, you liaise and contact supporters, sponsors, exhibitors, and how you really get involved in our forums and chat and everything else. So please do that. I'm sure you've got the opportunity with a personal smartphone or something like that to do that if you're struggling with your work kit. There's an opportunity to get involved in competitions and lots of great prizes up for grabs, lots of ways you can connect. So as I said in my introduction a moment ago, today's theme is about coaching and support at distance. And our first speaker today, we have Mark Abrahams, who is Head of Research and Analytics at Aptem. And he's going to talk us through the job seeker data journey and how we can make use of data to go beyond compliance and contractual reporting. Mark will also be looking at how data can be used to improve operational performance from a work coach and job seekers perspective to predict outcomes and manage risk. I'm sure you're not here to listen to me, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Mark.
Thank you, Scott. Right, as is always the want with technology, I'm trying to share my screen. Can everybody see the slides?
They're just coming up.
Excellent. Right, good morning everyone, and welcome to this talk basically about data analytics in the employability sector. I'm Mark Abrahams. Just a few words about my viewpoint in context. I'm a chartered psychologist, and my main area of work is organizational psychology, working in employability, talent and skill sectors, broadly from a psychometric and HR analytics perspective. I've been with Aptem about 10 years, and during that time, Aptem's been supporting providers in the employability sector over that time scale. Our earlier product was called My Work Search, and that system was used in Australia and in the UK on kind of work program type projects. And some of the thoughts I'm going to talk about today have kind of come out of our experiences of working in those two countries in that time frame. So in terms of the purpose of this session, providers typically in the employability sector are supporting job seekers on contracts such as Restart, and they're required to use digital platforms to support participants. And such platforms basically allow for a collection of large array of data, and we're not just restricted really to the data capture necessary for compliance and contractual reasons. And what I want to do is be able to look at how we can move from basically being data rich and insight poor, in other words, just collecting data and reporting on it because we have to actually being able to use more insightful use of the data. And some of this is going to be a bit conceptual and high level rather than the nuts and bolts of how to do it. But I hope that during this session, I kind of, the questions I pose and the ideas that come out kind of help you to go away and think, oh, we could do this, we could explore different aspects of the data we currently have. So yeah, basically that's where we're getting to. Okay, so in terms of data, I've heard the phrase in my HR analytics world of data everywhere and not a drop of insight. We collect, all providers collect data, and I'm assuming that most providers in the employability sector are going to be analysing and using data that you have to for various formats. But how can you get them maximise and get the most from your data? I mean, fundamentally, data is just information. And often it's presented in a statistical format. Sometimes it may be just a simple chart. It may also be something like a simple trend analysis. You might remember lines of best fit from mathematics at school when you're doing scatter plots. But in comparison, though, there could be more complex uses of data in terms of more complex trends analysis, such as something called regression, and also the creation of predictive models. And at the most extreme, you can use machine learning or artificial intelligence. Is very trendy at the moment to create predictive models and analyze risks, such as which participants and job seekers are more likely to drop out based on their activity in the system and the detailed data that you have on them. It doesn't have to be that complex, but there's a kind of a continuum from very simplistic to obviously more complex reporting. And in terms of how you look at the data, just conceptually, there are various models around business analytics. There's a guy called Josh Bersin, who now at Deloitte, but basically very well known in the HR analytics world. And he typically talked about 4 levels, that other people talk about 5 levels of analytics. But at the most simplest level, you have the descriptive level. Let's just record what happened, the operational reporting, collecting the data. Then we have the diagnostic. Can we analyze the data to understand the causes behind what happened? The causes behind particular outcomes. It might be in individual job seekers, probably not so likely, but maybe in operational teams and what's going on in terms of fairly standard business analytics. And for that, typically you'll need more advanced reporting and dashboards and ways of being able to summarize the data and drill down into particular instances or aspects of it. And then following that, you've also had predictive analytics around what might happen. So if you can look at, for example, what's happening with a particular data set in the past and match it to outcomes later on, then you can start building models around risk and where are the risks in terms of outcomes, achievements, and that of course links to payments and revenue. Following on from that, the next step is at the more sophisticated level is kind of prescriptive. How can we make it happen? And typically here in business analytics, you'll have more advanced models where using machine learning or scenario modeling, you can actually predict. You would look at what are the possible scenarios that could happen and which is more likely to occur. How can we evaluate what might go on in the future? And these typically are based on kind of very large big data models. And finally, how do you measure evaluative? How do you measure the impact of interventions and improvements you're undertaking? How do you measure what's going on in your process? And when entering this this session, I set up a couple of polls, and many thanks to those of you who've answered those polls. Right. So I've got a chart to show you based on the results from last night, which are basically based on 24 responses. I now see we've got 36 odd for this particular set. So the question I asked was, which of the following describes your organization's use of data? Are you just collecting it from compliance? Are you also combining it with outcomes and trying to do some linkage between what is it about the characteristics of job seekers, participants, and how that links to outcomes and whether you can use it to understand some predictions? Are you using live data? And the predictive risk is, are you using participant data, analyzing it to predict future risks? And finally, analyzing data to look at how participants and what advisors are doing even, and can you then use that to manage the process? So, and the results we currently have at the moment are very similar. From 37 answers are very similar, in fact, to the 21. The majority of you, thank you again for your responses, are focused on compliance. There's a certain level of matching participant details to outcomes. And the fourth one, very little work. We've got 3 out of 21, currently 8 out of 38. So it's roughly the same, slightly more percentage, 21% saying, yeah, we do a little bit of predictive risk prediction. And then from risk prediction, you can then feed that into managing how teams and how the support you give to job seekers more effectively. So before we get to that point, I want to talk about the participant journey and the data points that are collected along the route. For convenience, I'm going to use the restart contract because that's probably the most the one that most people are working on, but the data process will be data journey will be very similar for other employability programs. So in terms of the journey, you have initially some kind of engagement with the local JCP offices who make referrals, and those warm handover of participants come to the provider, and then obviously hopefully those participants are those that actually meet the restart criteria, and this then leads to an initial face-to-face meeting, which should ideally take place within 15 days, but certainly at least 30 days. Part of that will be some kind of on-program activity, followed by required face-to-face meetings, required contact. There'll be a development of a smart action plan. There'll be a diagnostic assessment. And these at certain points contractually need to be reviewed and updated. So the job seeker or the participant during this process is having contact with an online system, which could be used to track information. They're also having contact with an advisor or I'm going to call them a work coach. Again, their activity could be used to capture information and data. And all of this being recorded digitally allows for the collection of a multitude of data points that we can use effectively. So from a participant's perspective, and sorry for the complexity of this slide, basically initially you have some initial contact details and some other biographical information. At the first meeting or fairly soon afterwards, the initial meeting, there'll be some kind of diagnostic. You'll be looking at exploring what kind of barriers and trying to assess the barriers that the participant is facing. You're trying to assess what kind of additional support or any level of support is needed. There'll be a development of a smart action plan which needs to be recorded within the system. The action plan needs to be agreed. And as part of that action plan, there'll be a whole series of actions and activities that the participant has to engage in. As they progress through the program, for example, they'll be at least for example within Aptem and other systems, they'll be undertaking online job search. If it's for example at Aptem, we track that data. We track which vacancies are presented to them. We track which vacancies they click through, which ones they then eventually decide to apply for. We track. We have a kind of online resources and also job search advice center. So we track what the participant looks at, the date, time, how long they looked at these things, whether they attended any kind of online or even external, face-to-face workshops, for example, like a CV writing workshop or interview skills. So we can track all of this information, even with the online resources, just like a typical learning management system. We're able to track if they take any self-assessment quizzes and so on, whether they get them right. Moving on, as I go through the program, in terms of face-to-face meetings and even fortnightly contact as typical in Restart, we're able to record when those events took place, whether the work coach advisor was able to contact the participant or not. We're able to look at the results of the diagnostic, look how things have changed, and track that additional information. So there are all these data points that have been, can be captured. Some of this is very kind of structured data, and some of this might be kind of a bit unstructured data. So very structured data is where you're just kind of, you know, you have numbers or simple responses, you know, like multiple choice, or it could be a date, or whether some, just a simple record, this happened or it didn't happen. And that's fairly easy to analyze. What's happened, right? So from the work coach perspective, obviously their job is to identify barriers, work with the participant to create a program. And obviously there are various operational contractual requirements from the work coach to make sure they reach out and have contact with the participant every fortnight for restart, at least every fortnight, and also a face-to-face meeting at least every 4 weeks. So yeah, again, there is scheduling. The scheduling of meetings can be tracked. Whether the work coach is using the system. Interestingly, from our work in Australia, we found that, and it's not surprising, that the more activity and more interaction using the system a work coach had with a participant, the more likely there was a positive outcome in terms of the participant moving into employment. Of course, activity can happen outside of Aptem or outside of whichever system you're using, but in the projects that we were running over there with our partners, they were using Aptem to track and see whether it had a positive impact. We could also, from as I said, from a work coach provider within our system, there's a feature not only to track what vacancies are of interest to a participant, but also work coaches can do searches on participant or job seekers' behalf and suggest jobs to them. You know, here's a vacancy in your local area which matches your particular requirements, and we think you're going to be a good fit for. And again, I'm sure everybody does this, but being able to track easily whether those opportunities are suggested, whether the participant looks at them, whether they then even apply, can provide a whole bunch of potentially useful data. And final stage, obviously, is outcome. Now, that can be done by the work coach, it may possibly be done by a different team. The outcome tracking is key, especially if a participant with Restart is going into self-employment, because you need to be able to collect, as a provider, in order to get the outcome payment, you need to be able to evidence that the participant has gone into employment and is going to meets the £1,000 and £4,000 revenue thresholds. So this doesn't happen in isolation. We have all of this data, and then you have the perspective of the ops management or senior management team. They're needing to have an oversight. They're needing to decide, have we got enough resources? So is there data to give us an indication of what the engagement level is with the local JCP offices, so we know what the participant pipeline is going to be? Do we have enough resources? Is our caseload being managed correctly? How are people progressing? You will have benchmarks around the proportion of participants who will gain employment. I think that there's certainly a minimum expected level of, I think it's 25%, if I recall. But within your own businesses and organizations, you will have some benchmarks. So many people get an outcome within 3 months, 6 months, etc., etc. And obviously this leads to revenue. How many are dropping out? Can we analyze why they're dropping out and how we can improve the whole process? Is it down to the process? Is it down to individual teams? Is it down to particular subcontractors in our supply chain? Without the data, you won't be able to look at these things. And then, of course, on top of that, there's governance and oversight, which it obviously is important in terms of clarifying and making sure everything meets contractual requirements and so on. Okay. The other point that's worth mentioning here is, you can be limited to just saying, well, we've got all of this data from the previous slide. We've got this data. This is the process. This is what we collect. But being strategic about collecting data, are there other opportunities to collect further data points? And I've put some ideas here. Have participants raised all the risks and barriers that affect their job search? Have participants got sufficient confidence to search for work? Are they sufficiently motivated to succeed? I mean, from a psychological perspective, one of the key predictors of success is not necessarily the skills around job search and CV writing, etc. It's actually the sense of self-efficacy and self-confidence. Connie Weinberger's researched an awful lot on this in the last 10, 20 years around how your sense of self-efficacy in order to be able to be effective in your job search. So there are additional data points that can be collected, such as I say, might be personality traits. It might be from the positive psychology perspective. There's this concept of how positive you feel and so on, and some of those things, the appropriate interventions can take place. Another example, actually, from the coaching world is the level of kind of fit between the work coach and the participant. I'm not too sure, and it'd be interesting in the comments if anybody could, you could tell me this, how, to what extent, employability, restart providers look at this. In kind of the coaching world, in people development and learning the development world within large organizations, an awful lot of attention is paid to making sure that there's a fit between the coach and the participant, so that relationship and that interaction can be optimized and be as effective as possible, as opposed to just, here's a coach, off you go. Okay, so the data that we collect influences, firstly, what we can evidence, what we can analyze, and then obviously what we can improve and impact. Okay, I'm not suggesting we start collecting data, analyzing every single possible data point. You won't have the resources. It can be quite intensive and costly, and critically, it may not be useful. So starting from, our starting point really should be defining what's the business question, what are the key business questions we want answered, and consider what data and analysis is needed to robustly answer those questions. It's kind of obvious, but you'll be surprised how many people just collect data, and especially in today's world of machine learning, get the data, throw it at the computer, and the computer produces a result and says, oh, you can do this, the data means this. And that's okay, but it doesn't answer the so what question, which is, how is that useful to our business? How is it useful to improving what we're trying to achieve? I'd recommend reading a guy called Bernard Marr, UK guy, who writes a lot about this on LinkedIn and other places. He's also got a really good book called Big Data and Smart Analytics, where critically he's talking about defining the business question. I'm going to go through some examples now that are kind of relevant to employability and the job seeker journey. So what do you need to answer? As a takeaway, you'll probably have your own questions in mind, but if you haven't, then I hope that you leave this session with some questions that you want to go away and say, right, how can we improve this? Or how can we collect the data to look at this aspect of the job seeker journey? The data we collect. So basically at high level, we need robust, accurate data, not anecdotal data, not perceptions and thoughts. It actually needs to do data. And the data can be for planning. It can be for performance management. It could be for evidencing and compliance. So how can you improve resourcing? How can we improve delivery? How can we improve quality? I notice in the Restart contract, it talks about quality of action plans. And that's an interesting question, is and quality of face-to-face meetings. How do you actually define quality for a review meeting and a quality of an action plan? I'm not completely sure personally, but there must be some kind of metric within your organization you can define. Obviously, moving on, how can we identify risks in terms of learners, job seekers dropping out, not engaging, work coaches being overloaded or also not engaging, or even deciding that actually work coach churn, it could be an issue. And then, of course, how do we manage payments and funding? So we can divide these into really operations, compliance, and strategy. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to talk about operations and then a little bit on compliance, and hopefully we'll have time for questions as well. So within a Restart contract, as I said, I'm going to focus on Restart, but this would apply to other areas as well. Is, you know, there are some customer service standards, and these of course overlap with compliance requirements as well, because these are predominantly taken from the Restart contract. Or so, for example, how long is the delay between referrals and initial meetings? Are we meeting the requirements? Are we leaving participants hanging on too long? Are we getting the diagnostic assessment completed quickly? Are we agreeing the action plan? Is the one-to-one support and the one-to-one contact with participants occurring at least fortnightly? Is everybody receiving a full weekly face-to-face review meeting? Are action plans reviewed every 4 weeks? Are the diagnostics recompleted, reassessed every 4 months? And so these are kind of fairly standard metrics. And of course, with you can track, obviously you can track with an online system, you can track whether these requirements are being met. From the participant perspective, and this is probably more important because obviously you're hoping that they're engaged. So how can we monitor engagement? Obviously, seeking views from work coaches is one method. Using surveys and within HR analytics, employee engagement surveys and learning engagement from education are very common. Other ways of doing this might be around, can you track activity on the online platform and use that to predict how engaged participants are? And a simple measures might be how often people don't attend their face-to-face meetings, how often people aren't available when you try and contact them for the sort of weekly, fortnightly catch-up. Does the start rate say something about what's going on? So how is there something about maybe the relationship between the participant and the work coach that we can use data to analyze what's going on and then say, right, we need to somehow make an intervention and improve that so we can affect a better outcome. Within our system, certainly from logging in, there's an example of a participant profile. There are lots of data points that are readily available. So it's easily trackable. For example, how many jobs have been presented to a participant, how many they've actually clicked on, how many they've actually viewed and applied. Are they when do we next need to meet them or have a contact them? So again, this is easily tracked. And from there, the work coach, you can track also the work coach, which work coaches are on top of their caseload, which work coaches, for example, are failing to be responsive. And that doesn't mean necessarily they're not good at their jobs. It could be for lots of reasons. Their caseload is too high, the way contacts and meetings scheduled don't seem to work very efficiently. So that then leads on to how you can then take that data and performance manage the team. Another perspective as well, kind of operationally, is with this digital age, we're using more and more relying on online learning resources and online activities. And I mean, myself designing, being involved in designing online learning resources, you design some materials, you might pilot them with a smallish group, and then they go live. And you're never quite sure exactly how effective they are. Yeah, you design some materials around CV writing or writing prospective applications, and then you'll find that job seekers, they start watching it, and then it involves a video. Let's say it involves a video, and what happens is they only watch the sort of video through to the first 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and they just switch it off. And without being able to track that data, you won't then know that actually, well, we've put all this work in, but somehow the design and creation of this content has missed the mark, because if people are switching off a video that's sort of 5 minutes, 10 minutes long after the first 20 seconds, we're clearly not engaging. And this, you may think, oh, yeah, this is quite hard. It's fairly straightforward. And actually, every time you look at a YouTube video, all of these kind of analytics are fairly standard nowadays in terms of tracking whether you watch the video through to the end or not. Similarly, what are the levels of workshop attendance and outputs? Now, it might be, again, with these online resources and online workshops, etc., that the material works very well with one particular cohort. Maybe job seekers who've got a degree, for example, but not well with job seekers with lower level qualifications, or who are looking for not looking for kind of degree level jobs, for example. You've got to be very careful about, can we make sure we match the quality of the resources and the focus with the needs of the participant. Finally, obviously, outcomes are going to be important. If you're on the MIS management or in the SMT team, then looking at how many people go into work, whether those are full-time or part-time, and that's important because that actually impacts on the phasing of when outcome payments are made. Do you have how well people are work coaches, and how well is the cohort of participants actually gaining an outcome? Can we project what's happening with those, and are they going to get, for example, getting into work in the next 3 months? How also other kind of aspects of where things might not be working. How many participants have been mandated? Can we look at how many participants are not showing progress or engagement? And then from there, that helps us to manage the financial side of things. And finally, obviously, what data is there on the pipeline of new referrals? And that's kind of important because where that could give you a level of indication of level of engagement with the local JCP office. So I asked initially, again, during this poll, whether you, which tools you currently use for data analysis. And it was basically, do you use Excel, Power BI, etc. I'll talk through some of these in a moment. So as I kind of expected, and I believe we've now got 40 people who've responded to this, 44 who've responded, and 80% of you use Excel, 20%, 23% use Power BI, some use Tableau, which is very similar to Power BI, and 5% use Python R. The lower two, Python R, SPSS Starter, are all statistics packages. Whereas I'd say Power BI, Tableau are great for being able to present data quickly and create dashboards and allow you to drill down. Python and R, SPSS, these statistics packages allow you to create trend analysis, regression. Allow you to automate more complex analyses, and actually with Python and R also undertake machine learning. So it's all around how do you create sophisticated data visualizations that you can make sense of. So here are some examples. Very briefly, here's an example of office by office, and on the bottom line overall, what's the proportion of people meeting the, proportion of initial meetings occurring in the first 15 days, followed by 16 to 30 days or more than 31 days or more. And clearly overall, we're kind of meeting the restart requirement of having 85% of meetings within the first 30 days. But as you can see, if you drill down office by office, or it could be subcontractor by subcontractor in your supply chain, it is clearly working really well for some, and not so well for others. Okay. But if I move on to the next one, but there are other ways of visualizing the data. Another way of visualizing, and I hope this slide is fairly clear, is again, you can break it down, and this is called a jitter plot, where you look at the detail of the distribution of these when these meetings occur. And I've also color coded them by, well, this is when the meeting was scheduled, and then whether someone attended, the participant attended or not. And using these kind of charts and more sophisticated charts, which are not really standard in Power BI and Tableau, though you can create them with a bit of work. They're fairly easy to create in something like Python or R, allow you to drill down the spot trends. Now, it's sort of not obvious in this example, but it might be that there's a particular office where they schedule all of the meetings very quickly, but people don't turn up. Or it might be that there are trends where other particular offices or particular, if it's subcontractors, there's a high non-attendance rate. Now, that may be for a number of reasons that needs to be explored. Maybe that okay, they're dealing with lots of job seekers, but also there needs to be more engagement between when the handover is made and when the actual meeting takes place. More simplistically, obviously, we can just count number of reviews not attended during the month. But in terms, as I said before, in terms of kind of identifying risks, where a face-to-face meeting or review doesn't happen, that might suggest that either there's a risk of the participant dropping out, or it might say something about the relationship between the advisor and the cohort that they're managing. And this can be done by advisor or more granularly. Obviously, in terms of compliance, you have with Restart various monthly reporting requirements. I've seen in the tender documents, these typically can include things like caseload sizes for work coach and key workers, staff levels, details of participants who are not meeting requirements. You're going to have to be able to easily access and report on these. So finally, I'm going to skip to strategic challenges. And again, with data, looking at supporting participants in employability and job seekers at a more broader level, you need to look at also how accurate is our data? Can we collect data to enable us to understand what are our strengths, where we should develop our provision, and that might be within your organization, it might be in the supply chain. Obviously, from a more strategic perspective, you've got other questions about which programs, which particular cohorts of participants are more profitable, but obviously we're trying to get everybody into work and everybody have help everybody to have a fulfilling life. And following on from that, do we have ready access to relevant data? And this leads into, it's not often enough just to be able to build analytics and have analytics. It's also around building a data culture. I've previously worked in organizations where you have a team of data analysts and actually some statisticians who can do some really kind of insightful analytics, but they are separate from the operational teams, and they're separate from the coalface. So the insights that they develop simply don't get cascaded out into the organization, and therefore don't have an impact on individual teams. So it's always useful. It's useful, I would argue, to build alongside building your data expertise, also to build a data culture where where it's positive around data, where access to data is readily available. Only by sharing the insights can you have an impact on the team. That the data is meaningfully presented. And as in any kind of organizational change process, if you're going to start increasing the level of reporting, people need to understand and being actively involved in that, as opposed to having a sense that, oh, you're collecting metrics and so on, and it's a punitive thing. Actually, data reporting can be collaborative and have a real positive impact. So I'm conscious of time, but high level, having accurate, accessible, timely data will impact participant outcomes, their experience, the organizational effectiveness, and also financial outcomes. As some key takeaways, critically, data can add significant value, especially operationally, but it's important to focus on the key questions. Don't let the analytics, the data or the analysts drive it. So what are you trying to do? Are you trying to improve the work coach participant relationship experience? Are you trying to just manage the resources better? Are you trying to make sure that the online learning and additional support is effective? So consider what data is actually needed and make sure that when it's reported, it's actually reported in a meaningful way rather than just a number. And so what? It needs to be, is it answering the business question? And I've got a small amount of time outstanding. So do we have any questions or comments?
We don't have any questions at the moment. We have been asked around the slides, but I've responded to that one.
I was going to say, if there are particular slides, you can of course reach out to me as well. I'm happy to share.
You've got your email address there, Mark.
Sorry, yeah.
There we are. It's always an interesting topic, data, because I think we don't realise just how much we rely on it in order to make progress, to move forward and to make, changes in the way that we work within employability and the support of our service users. And when we think about how much things have changed, and from an IEP perspective, we absolutely use the e-learning and we monitor our engagement activities as well. And it's really crucial to us that we, because people won't necessarily write into you and say, I did enjoy or I didn't enjoy, but you can certainly tell by their engagement levels.
Fantastic. We've had a question come in there for you from David. Thank you, David. David says, I am interested in how you would measure client confidence.
Right. Okay. From a psychological perspective, there are a few methods. There are various questionnaires out there. There's something called the self-efficacy questionnaire. There's something called locus of control. There are various others which I think are in the public domain. They've been created by academic research and applied in employability in other areas. So that's one way of doing it. There are also some other techniques where you might want to indirectly measure it in terms of their activity on a system. So for example, if you're suggesting jobs to a participant who you think is a very good fit, and they're consistently not applying for those jobs, and you're able to track that, then you might think, something's up here. Is it that they're not confident or not? And I see there's another question. Do you have any suggestions on how to encourage teams to build a data culture? Yeah, okay, that's probably a whole session in itself. At the simplest level, it's around any change process. It's around making sure that people understand what the data is going to be used for, and that at a basic level, that actually they are kind of data, they're numerate. They don't have to be that numerate, but you need to make sure that the outputs of the analytics, the charts and the dashboards are easily understood by the audience that are going to make use of it. Sadly, I've seen lots and lots of dashboards, even ones I created in the early days of my careers, and even analytics reports, where looking at them, with the eye of experience, I've realized that they're just numbers, and they don't answer the so what question, that how is this useful? How does it mean? What does it mean? And that's the key point, I think, about data culture is creating dashboards, reporting that's accessible, easy to understand, relevant to people, and doesn't create a threatening culture. They can actually make use of it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. It's very interesting, isn't it? When we all look back on our early work, it's always a challenge. Here comes Scott.
Sorry, Helen. Yeah, I was going to come back to that point, actually, Mark, and I think you answered it really well. I think, we're doing some work at the moment around the balance of compliance and quality improvement, and how clearly the starting point is different. And I think one of the key elements of that is the fear. Fear is a big word, but the challenge and fear of people being in a situation where things are reported effectively and having no blame culture in terms of the improvement that is required there. And I think it's fair to say that our sector has been driven by compliance, which is an incredibly important element of what we do, probably for far too long. And actually, there is room and requirement for data analytics, probably even more so in a quality improvement culture than there is in the compliance culture. And we always adhere to data insights being very much a compliance element, and they're clearly not. So we are trying to instill this at the moment, and it's a fascinating area. And I'd love to kind of pick up with you further down the line about thoughts and feelings about how we can do things really effectively from that point of view. So a comment, not a question. I apologise. It's really interesting what you were talking about then.
Yeah, it's a kind of high. I've given a kind of high level view of but some of the questions I've raised hopefully have got people thinking about what can we measure and how we can use this to help the
and ultimately ultimately why are we measuring it in the first place?
Yeah,
that's the reason for doing it. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That's absolutely fascinating. Any more questions on the chat or the Q&A for Mark, Helen, Emma, anybody?
Not at present, no.
Okay, that's fine. Give people a few moments to think and reflect, because it was very, very interesting and very in depth.
What we can do, and I've been in contact with Mina from Aptem while we've been on, is we will send out some of the data slides can be sent out after the session. So we will look to do that because we have had some requests for that. So that's something that we will organise.
Great. Well, I think that's, in the immortal words of the sporting analogy, an early bath then, Mark, as it were. But it's been great having you here. Thank you very much for your time and energy today, discussing the job seeker data journey and how we can make best use of that data to go beyond compliance and contractual reporting, which is clearly something that I'm really interested in. Mark, really, really good presentation. Thank you very much. And thank you very much once again to yourself and to be part of the Digital Technology Conference. this year. So that's fantastic. In lieu of any other questions, we'll release Mark and say thank you very much. And we will see you at 12:45. There is a bit of a break now, and we'll be joined by Louise Doyle and Sally Forsyth from Mesmer, and they're going to be presenting their topic, delivering your best quality to your customers. So real synergy in terms of the starting point today from Aptem. And then at 2 o'clock we have, which is only can be described as controlled chaos, which is the online networking, speed networking sessions. It is so much fun. Please join us through the app for that. And I can't encourage you enough to do that. And also join in all the competitions and everything else through the app. So leaves me to say thank you very much, Mark. And we'll see you at 12:45 for the next session.